And what else? Yes. They're in Abilene. And then Jimmy goes again in a week. Back to Abilene. I've heard it's like 140 or something. You know, they don't let the kids have cell phones. So, you know, there's like, and even if you want to send an email to one of your children, you know, you have to pay. And then each morning they deliver it. It's almost like a telegram. But Jimmy can email. And so I haven't heard if they actually had AC in the dorm. But, oh, okay, good. Because last year I don't think they had AC. And so, oh, man. All right. You're ready. We're ready. Let's say a prayer. Here we go. Let's pray. Father, we do praise you for your grace and mercy, and we're thankful for all the great and wonderful and awesome things you do. And we just pray for safety for those that are traveling, both the group that's here this week, that you will bless them with safety as they travel back home. You'll be with those of our number that are in Abilene, that you will keep them safe back to here. And we're mindful of Floyd and his surgery, and for others, for Jean, and for those that are facing illness, Missy, and for, Father, that you will bless surgeries, you'll bless treatments, and Father, that you will give us wisdom and help us as we serve you. And Father, we are mindful of Kenton and for his love for you, and we just pray you'll bless him tonight as he leads this Bible study. And it's in your son's name we pray. Amen. And I guess maybe, does anyone need to go to some other location? Maybe. Otherwise, you're wired up. Okay.
Okay. Hopefully people can hear me with the dynamic speaker microphone, which I'm not, but going to talk a little bit about biblical archaeology tonight. And so I am going to preface this with, this has not been something that I've done like years of study with. You know, it's always been something that's kind of interesting to me, but hasn't really been the thing that I've really delved into. But back in April, Stephanie and I went to London, and we went to the British Museum, and we knew they had a lot of stuff. Didn't really have that many ideas of what they had, and we were going through the museum, and we started seeing stuff that were like, well, that's in the Bible. And then you get down to the gift shop one day, and they have this book. It's called Through the Museum with the Bible, and it's sort of the guidebook to make sure that while you're going through all these 100 rooms of the museum, that you can actually find all the different artifacts that are relevant. And I will say that I have pared this down a little bit from all the things that are there, because I'm trying to fit into just a Wednesday night class. And maybe this works. Okay, so this is my classification of types of artifacts. There's kind of the ones that just give you more historical context about what things were like in Bible times, so you can kind of visualize as you're reading what things are. And then there's those that actually confirm historical events that are in the Bible. And I think those fall into two different categories. There's the ones that are, I'm going to call weak, which are things where it seems like it's saying the same thing, and it might be saying the same thing, but there's enough sufficient details that there's a pretty big shadow of a doubt about whether it's actually the same thing. And then there's the strong ones, which, names are the same, other details are exactly the same, and those ones are really interesting. We've got some of all of these in here. And I'm going to go kind of through in chronological order, and we'll just get into this. So, the flood, I think most of us know that there's multiple versions of the flood story throughout the world, which kind of makes sense, because if everybody's descended from Noah, well, everybody should have this story. In the museum, they had two different versions. There's the Babylonian one, which is really old, and then an Assyrian tablet as well. Both of them have similarities to what you find about the recorded account of Noah in Genesis, but there are some differences. The main details are somebody got a divine message to go build an ark and build a boat, put all the animals in it, survive the flood, and then repopulate the earth. The name of the deity, the name of the person, and some of the other details have changed, but that part's basically there. And Ur is where Abraham was from, and he's born there a long, long time ago, and then followed God's command to leave Ur, go to Haran, and then on to Canaan. And I'm going to jump over to Stephen's summary of this in Acts chapter 7, because I like the summary version. It's a little faster to get to. Chapter 7, verse 2 of Acts. And Stephen said, "Brothers and fathers, hear me. The God of glory appeared to our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia, before he lived in Haran, and said to him, 'Go out from your land and from your kindred, and go into the land I will show you.' Then he went out from the land of the Chaldeans and lived in Haran. And after his father died, God removed him from there into this land which you are now living. Yet he gave him no inheritance in it, not even a foot's length, but promised to give it to him as a possession and to his offspring after him, though he had no child." So this is so long ago that it's really easy for us to sometimes think that, even though it's a city, it's probably pretty primitive. But in fact, Ur was pretty sophisticated, and Edward actually mentioned this on Sunday. But still, in my mind, I kind of always had this idea that Ur was really primitive. But while this is not directly related to the Bible, other than the fact that it's from Ur, this is a clay tablet with a whole bunch of mathematical formulas on it. And doing more research on this, you find out that the people in Ur, 4,500 years ago, had algebra. They had a version of Pythagorean theorem 1,500 years before Pythagoras. They had a value of pi. So the rest of you don't care, but I'm an engineer, so math is kind of cool to me. So that's pretty sophisticated to me. But then you stop and go, Abraham was in this city of sophistication, all these fancy things for the ancient world, and God tells him, leave that and go out here and live in tents for the rest of your life. And you're not even going to have this land, but it's going to be for your descendants. And so I think that's kind of an interesting thing as we look at the priorities that we can kind of get caught up to if we look at what the world is telling us rather than what is God saying. So there's a bunch of clay tablets, a collection of them called the Armana Letters. There's a whole bunch of these. These are all basically addressed to the pharaohs of Egypt. And I'm going to classify this one as a weak or maybe non-existent confirmation of the Bible. But basically what you have going on here is one of these particular tablets is from the king of Gezer to Pharaoh. And he's asking for help against the invading Piru. Now, it doesn't take a lot to maybe skew that word a little bit and say, well, is that Hebrew? I mean, that's pretty close. And, I can just imagine, all the Canaanite peoples, what are they thinking after the Israelites crossed the Jordan with Joshua? And there's just a huge number of people, and Jericho falls, and all these places fall to the Israelites with the help of God. They're probably going to be reaching out for help wherever. And so the actual tablet translation here is, since the Hyperu are stronger than us, may the king, my lord, might help me from the Hyperu, so that the Hyperu do not destroy us. So what I've been able to find here is Hyperu is kind of a general term for landless people, but it's kind of, it could go both ways. You could say, oh, these are just marauding bands, but are you going to call Egypt for help if it's just marauding bands? How weak is your city if you have to do that? On the other hand, if it's like the whole nation of Israel coming across, maybe that's a little bit more significant. The biggest problems with this are debates about what the time of the Exodus were. I've read a couple authors that suggest there's two very different possible ones, and then this fits fairly well with one time frame, and it doesn't fit at all. There's also, is Hyperu actually equal to Hebrew, which may not be. And then the other thing is, this is from the king of Gezer, Yapahu, but in Joshua 10:33, the name of the king of Gezer is Horam, although it also says there that Joshua completely defeated all the people from Gezer, so maybe Yapahu was the person who was in charge after him. I will also say, like I said, I'm not an expert on this, so if I say anything that somebody knows is just downright wrong, please interrupt and correct me. So, the next part we're going to get to is the Assyrians, and I'm going to have a little tangent here because it was just kind of cool. A lot of the Assyrian art is these stone reliefs on the walls, and this eagle-headed winged guy shows up in a lot of their art. And it looked familiar, and then I figured out why when I was reading. This is what C.S. Lewis used as his model for Tash in the Chronicles of Narnia. So, but this is where the Assyrian empire was. Particularly notice Lachish down there south of Jerusalem, because that's where we're going to go to in a little bit, and also Samaria with the northern 10 tribes. First, this one's actually interesting because this is mentioning the Israelites for an event that is not actually recorded in the Bible. The people are recorded, but this particular, the king of Assyrian records on this stone tablet that he got tribute from King Jehu of Israel, so much silver something. And you see in the book of 2 Kings, you see that, Jehu's king of Israel at this time. That all lines up. The Bible doesn't mention the giving of tribute to the Assyrians. It's not important to what we need to be seeing in the Bible, but it is interesting nonetheless. And then, of course, we have the 10 northern tribes go into captivity, and we can read about that over in 2 Kings, chapter 17, verses 22 through 24. The people of Israel walked in all the sins that Jeroboam did, and they did not depart from them until the Lord removed Israel out of his sight, as he had spoken by all his servants the prophets. So Israel was exiled from their own land to Assyria until this day. And the kings of Assyria brought people from Babylon, Chutha, Ava, Hamath, Sepharvaim, and placed them in the cities of Samaria instead of the people of Israel. And they took possession of Samaria and lived in its cities. So that happened mostly under this King Sargon's predecessor, Shalmaneser the fifth, I think. But the end of it happened under King Sargon II, and he records in his records that I besieged and conquered the town of Samaria, led away 27,290 inhabitants, and settled there people from countries that I had conquered. So the British Museum has this relief of Sargon, and who we think is Sennacherib, his son. The actual prism with the record's actually in the Louvre in Paris instead of the British Museum. So, but it's important to think about that part. And then, if we go over into just the next chapter over in 2 Kings 18, verses 13 through 15. In the 14th year of King Hezekiah, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came up against all the fortified cities of Judah and took them. And Hezekiah, king of Judah, sent to the king of Assyria at Lachish, saying, I have done wrong, withdraw from me, whatever you impose on me I will bear. And the king of Assyria required of Hezekiah, king of Judah, 300 talents of silver and 30 talents of gold. And so, in this giant statue of this guy's head on a bull's body, and I think it weighs something like 20 tons, you can kind of see the line where the British actually cut it in half when they moved it here. Really big statue, but down here in the inscription, by the feet, there's an inscription there that basically says that the Assyrians got from Hezekiah 800 talents of silver and 30 talents of gold. And you're going, well, the gold's right, but more silver. And the scholars have determined that from here and other places, that the way the Assyrians counted silver is different than the way that the Israelites did. They basically counted silver plus anything that's silver equivalent value or something, whereas the Israelites were just counting silver. And then we have first prophecy over in Micah chapter 1, verse 13. And Micah saying, harness the steeds to the chariots, inhabitants of Lachish. It was the beginning of sin to the daughter of Zion, for in you were found the transgressions of Israel. Therefore you shall give parting gifts to Morsheth-Gath, and the house of Achaz will be a deceitful thing to the kings of Israel. I will again bring a conqueror to you, inhabitants of Marsha. The glory of Israel shall come to Adullam. Make yourself bald and cut off your hair for the children of your delight. Make yourself as bald as the eagle, for they shall go from you into exile. And then I'm going to jump to 2 Chronicles, verses 9 to 10. Chapter 32 says, after this, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, who was besieging Lachish with all his forces, sent his servants to Jerusalem to Hezekiah, king of Judah, and all the people of Judah who were in Jerusalem, saying, thus says Sennacherib, king of Assyria, on what are you trusting that you endure the siege of Jerusalem? So, kind of parallel to the part in 2 Kings. But basically, the Assyrians came up, took all the fortified cities except for Jerusalem, and they were proud enough of this capture of Lachish that they went back and they built special room in the palace in Nineveh, and then decorated it with all these reliefs that basically describe the battle that took place to capture Lachish. So you can kind of see over on the left, they're fighting, they're going up the walls, and then as you go to the right, you got people being led away as slaves, and then it continues around the room. Here you have the Assyrian army actually bringing things to the king, sitting on the throne there, and giving him these things. So I think the important part, though, is you sit and ask yourself, well, if you're coming against Judah, Lachish isn't the capital, it's Jerusalem. So why would you go back and make such a fancy room about Lachish? And so we got to remember that over in 2 Chronicles 32, verse 20, that says, Then Hezekiah the king and Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amoz, prayed because of this and cried to heaven. And the Lord sent an angel who cut off all the mighty warriors and commanders and officers in the camp of the king of Assyria. So he returned with shame of his face to his own land. And when he came into the house of his God, some of his own sons struck him down there with swords. So the Lord saved Hezekiah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem from the hand of Sennacherib, king of Assyria, and from the hand of all his enemies, and provided for them on every side. So I think this is an example of Sennacherib trying to save face of going, well, I didn't really intend to take Jerusalem. Lachish, that's what the real goal was. So that's my interpretation. Maybe they just did fancy stuff all the time, but you don't write about the bad history if you're writing your own history. So conveniently left out that part where their army got wiped out by the angel. And I do want to point out that all the wall art with the reliefs is all nice to look at and tells a nice visual story, but all the details are actually coming from the text that's inscribed on these prisms. And there's a lot of those, that's how they wrote down their history. They get these clay prisms or tablets sometimes and just write them down. So the one on the left, there's just basically, that's the one that goes with the room that discusses all the capture of Lachish. And then this is another one that talks about the tribute he got from Hezekiah, and also says that he shut up Hezekiah in Jerusalem like a bird. So he talks about it a little bit that he didn't conquer Jerusalem, but not still claims victory there. And then these are some more reliefs from Nineveh, but one thing about these you'll notice is they're all burned. And so if we go over to Nahum, so Nahum chapter 3, verse 15, and this whole chapter here is a woe unto Nineveh. It says, There will the fire devour you, the sword will cut you off, it will devour you like the locust. Multiply yourselves like the locust, multiply yourself like the grasshopper. So basically Nahum had prophesied that it would be destroyed by fire. And it was destroyed, and it was covered up by the desert sand, and they mostly was gone to the point that until they discovered it in 1847, there was actually Bible scholars in the early 1800s, 1700s, whatever, were like, well, Nineveh wasn't even a place. That's just made up in the Bible. So that's another interesting part about this is you'll have people claiming that, oh, these things in the Bible, they never really happened or whatever, and then you find things. And so that's another interesting thing. Sadly, I think in 2014, ISIS destroyed a lot of the archaeological site there. It's just outside of Mosul, Iraq. But these parts are in the British Museum in London, which is a much safer place to visit. All right, so from the Assyrians, of course, we move on to the Babylonians. So in 2 Kings chapter 24, says in verse 10, At that time the servants of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up to Jerusalem, and the city was besieged. And Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to the city with it while her servants were besieging it. And Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, gave himself up to the king of Babylon, himself and his mother and his servants, and his officials, and his palace officials. The king of Babylon took him prisoner in the 8th year of his reign, and carried off all the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures of the king's house, and cut in pieces all the vessels of gold in the temple of the Lord, which Solomon, king of Israel, had made, as the Lord had foretold. He carried away all Jerusalem and all the officials and all the mighty men of valor, 10,000 captives, and all the craftsmen and the smiths. None remained except the poorest people of the land. And he carried away Jehoiakim to Babylon. The king's mother, the king's wives, his officials, and the chief men of the land he took into captivity from Jerusalem to Babylon. And the king of Babylon brought captive to Babylon all the men of valor, 7,000, and the craftsmen and the metal workers, 1,000, all of them strong and fit for war. And the king of Babylon made Mattaniah, Jehoiakim's uncle, king in his place, and changed his name to Zedekiah. And this tablet here, which is recording this from the Babylonian perspective, says, the king encamped against the city of Judah, and on the second day of the month of Adar, he seized the city and carried away the king. He appointed there a king of his own choice, received it in its heavy tribute, and carried them off to Babylon. So here we have basically another one of these strong confirmations of, yeah, they got carried off. He put in a king in his place that was to be a puppet king. The other artifacts there are these bricks, and that inscription there basically just says this was done by Nebuchadnezzar building this building and how great Nebuchadnezzar was. If you read much of it, he sounds very full of himself, which is exactly kind of what you expect for the guy who in the book of Daniel gets to go, eat grass like a cow for a while until he comes to his senses. But there's actually probably half a dozen of these bricks just in the museum. There was all of the bricks got, not all the bricks, but thousands of the bricks got stamped with this inscription. So it's kind of interesting. And then this is the lion that one of how the throne room in Nebuchadnezzar was decorated. So that kind of gives you more of a feel for what Daniel would have been working in as he served the Babylonians. And we just read that Zedekiah was appointed as the puppet king, but he wasn't a good puppet king. And so we see over in Jeremiah that he was trying to rebel against the Babylonians. And so Jeremiah chapter 34, verse 7. When the army of the king of, then Jeremiah the prophet spoke all these words to Zedekiah, king of Judah and Jerusalem, when the army of the king of Babylon was fighting against Jerusalem and all the cities of Judah that were left, Lachish and Hezekiah, for these were the only fortified cities of Judah that remained. So the story continues, but the important part there is that you're down to Jerusalem and Lachish and Hezekiah at this point. And these little broken pieces of pottery, which are just written on with ink or something. Apparently broken pottery was the scrap paper of the ancient world. And these are messages sort of between the soldiers of the towns that are going around from tower to tower, making sure that they're communicating as they're being besieged. And one of these basically says, we're watching from the beacon from Lachish, following the signals you sir sent, but we do not see Hezekiah, which is only 9 miles north of Lachish, so if they've got a fire burning as a beacon or something, then things are probably going badly for Hezekiah, which, so we know at this point, Babylon comes in and basically utterly destroys everything, tears down the temple in Jerusalem, and everything is a mess. So then we get to skip ahead to the Persians. I'm skipping a number of artifacts, but they're basically a name and a position of that this guy was king or the official or whatever. And those are useful actual confirmations, but you have to go do a lot more digging in and linking things together to make those useful. So we're not going to that level of study tonight. We're just going to go with the easy confirmation ones. So basically, Babylonians are there, and then the Persians take over, and Cyrus, when he takes over, one of the first things he does is he basically, I'm going to jump over to 2 Chronicles chapter 36, because he's going to send the Jews back home. So 2 Chronicles 36, verse 22. Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and also put it in writing. Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord, the God of heaven, which has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and has charged me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Whoever is among you, of all his people, may the Lord his God be with him. Let him go up. So the artifact here is called the Cyrus cylinder, and it doesn't mention the Jews specifically, but what it does talk about is sort of this general proclamation expanded to everybody, that basically all the people that the Babylonians have captured, they get to go home, and we're going to restore their temples because we don't want their gods to be mad at us and whatnot. So, and there's a big sort of changing thing, making sure that everybody knows that he's a new king and he's taken over and things are going to be different now. But it is basically the same thing of, well, Jews go back to Jerusalem, you're going to rebuild that temple, and so that's another piece we have there. All right, now we're going to jump forward to the New Testament, and these are more, we have a couple coins here, and so I'll jump over to Matthew chapter 22. Chapter 22, verses 15. Then the Pharisees went and plotted how to entangle him in his words, and they sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians, saying, "Teacher, we know that you are true and teach the way of God truthfully, and you do not care about anyone's opinion, for you are not swayed by appearances. Tell us then, what do you think? Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not?" But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, "Why put me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin for the tax." And they brought him a denarius. And Jesus said to them, "Whose likeness of the inscription is this?" They said, "Caesar's." And he said to them, "Therefore render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." When they heard it, they marveled, and they left him and went away. And so, down there in the bottom left, we have a coin from this era that has Tiberius Caesar on it. And there's also a marble statue of Tiberius Caesar. I'm not sure how well the coin captures him. One of the two, I think, did a not great job, but that is, the same sort of coin they're talking about right here. So that's kind of a cool thing. And then if we skip over another couple chapters to Matthew chapter 17. Matthew chapter 17, verses 24 through 27. When they came to Capernaum, the collectors of the 2 drachma tax went up to Peter and said, "Does your teacher not pay the tax?" He said, "Yes." And when we came into the house, Jesus spoke to him first, saying, "What do you think, Simon? From whom do the kings of the earth take toll or tax? From their sons or from others?" And we said, "From others." Jesus said to him, "Then the sons are free. However, not to give offense to them, go to the sea and cast a hook and take the first fish that comes up, and when you open its mouth, you will find a shekel. Take that and give it to them for me and for yourself." And so the top coin there is the two drachma coin. That would be the tax. And then the bottom one's one that's worth 4 drachma, which would be sufficient to cover Jesus and Peter. Now, I don't know whether that's the coin that came out of the fish's mouth or whether it was just even better silver that came out. The other thing that the scholars point to here is that the coins of Tyre had better silver content than the Roman coins, and so the priest wanted them to pay the tax with the coins of Tyre rather than the Roman coins, which meant that you had to have your money changed when you went to the temple to do this, and that's why you have money changers over in John 2:14 when Jesus comes in and chases them out and throws over the table and spills everything. A couple other coins here that are interesting. So the local rulers got to mint a certain amount of coins in their own jurisdictions. So this one's that's minted by Pilate. And then the bottom one was minted by Herod the Great, who was the one who was in charge when Jesus was born. And then lamps, which this has always been kind of an interesting thing to me, the parable of the 10 virgins, because you talk about lamps, and none of us use oil lamps, and so it's really not something that we're familiar with. At least I'm not familiar with. Maybe you guys use them, but these are some examples of lamps from the first century. And so in Matthew 25. I wrote that down right. Yeah, Matthew 25, verses 1 through 12. He says, "Then the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish and 5 were wise. For the foolish took their lamps. They took no oil with them. But the wise took a flask of oils with their lamps." And so you can see there's the place for the wick coming out, and then there's the place for you to pour the oil in on the top. So just more of an interesting visualization of what these girls were carrying around with them. And then we have some artifacts from Ephesus. So I'm going to jump over to Acts chapter 19. We know some of this. So in verse 23, about that time there arose no little disturbance concerning the way. For a man named Demetrius, a silversmith, who made silver shrines of Artemis, brought no little business to the craftsmen. And these he gathered together to the workmen in similar trades and said, "Men, you know from this business we have our wealth, and you see and hear, not only in Ephesus, but in almost all of Asia, that this Paul has persuaded and turned away a great many people, saying that gods made with hands are not gods." So this is actually a bronze little idol of Artemis. Most things that are silver have kind of gotten melted down over the years. So there's not as many silver things. There's a lot more bronze things that have survived. But they were really into Artemis. They had the temple there in Ephesus. There's a coin. They have part of the column there, but didn't have a great picture of that one. And then we're going to go a little bit past that. Of course, we know that in 70 AD, the Romans had had enough, and these guys came in, and they destroyed Jerusalem. So this is Emperor Vespasian, who was in charge, and his son Titus, who would be the next emperor. And they basically came in and knocked things out. This is obviously a horrible tragedy to the Jews. I hadn't really appreciated that this was a big deal to the Romans. I kind of thought, oh, this is just another thing, go put down a revolt or whatever. But this was important enough to them that they minted a coin commemorating it. It says Judea captured on it, basically. And so that's kind of, apparently this revolt was a bigger deal to them than I had thought. And then we'll fast forward a little bit farther into the 4th century. And what you see with early Christians. And one thing that, in all our, any Christian thing of our era, you see a cross and you think, oh, that's Christian. But I think one thing that we forget sometimes is that that's not what the early Christians used in any imagery that they made, because the cross is a horrible way to die, and they didn't want to think about that so much. What they had mostly was this Chi-Rho symbol, which is basically the first 2 Greek letters of Christ in Greek. Christo, basically, you have Chi and Rho, and you stick them over each other. And you also see a lot of times with the thing on the right, they also put Alpha and Omega, because we know from Book of Revelation that Jesus is the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. So lots of examples with this. These are also the only artifacts in the whole presentation here that would remain in the British Museum if the British Museum was to ever actually give all their stuff back that they took from the rest of the world, because these ones are actually from Britain. And then final thing, and this is actually in the British Library, which is a couple miles down the road from the British Museum because the British Museum got too full, is called the Codex Sinaiticus, and this is basically a 4th century manuscript of the New Testament, and I'm not sure if you can see, it's written in Greek there. Basically, it's one of the oldest surviving manuscripts of the New Testament. So it's just nice to be able to look at that and go, like, you have at least back to the 4th century, you can look at things and go, yeah, God's word says the same thing now that it did then. So I think that's all I had. So if anybody has any questions, I can try to answer, but again, I'm not an expert. So, and if not, well, I guess I'm done a little bit early. I think I was asked to be done 7 minutes from now. So all right. Oh, thank you. All right. Well, thank you for your time.